my name is Beck and welcome to take 2 of my September wrap-up. It is now a later September wrap-up because I filmed all of this and then realised that my microphone that plugs into my camera had run out of battery and there's no flag anywhere to tell me that that has happened. So now I'm using my external microphone instead, and I lugged all of this stuff from Dave's parents' house to our new house that we're painting but not quite living in. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But hopefully I'm now able to sit down and talk to you about the 5 books that I encountered in September. Now, while I did finish a couple of books, unfortunately there were 2 DNFs, and DNF basically means did not finish, so books that I started and then put down. So firstly, I want to talk about one of those DNFs because that's a book that I put down very early in the month just because the mood wasn't hitting right, and that book is a beloved book and it is Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson, and I've really enjoyed Meat Market and Clean by this same author, but this is a new book by her in an adult genre, or in the adult category of the urban fantasy genre, whereas the other 2 books that I've read by her at least are contemporary focused. So I thought I'm gonna love this because it's mostly fantasy. It's about witches in the modern day. Obviously there is a coven in here, but I don't know whether the witches are parts of the coven or whether the coven is a bit corrupted and they've escaped it and they've got their own lives and pathways now and then they get brought back to it. I only got 20 pages into this, and at the beginning there's a rogue witch or wizard that the coven is tracking down. And so I don't really know too much about the other characters in here because it didn't really, like I said, it didn't really get far into it, so I didn't have time with all of them, and I didn't have enough time in one of the perspectives to get to know characters very well. So the reason that I put this down is ultimately just because of the writing style and the tone. I did not expect this to be a multiple POV story, and obviously it is, and I just wanted something short, sweet, to the point, urban fantasy by an author whose writing style and tone I've enjoyed before. But looking at Meat Market and Clean, both of those are told from main character perspectives, and those main characters drive the entire story. It's not multiple POV. So I went into this with expectations that I probably shouldn't have, and I really like Juno Dawson's writing, so I'm like, I think I should give this a break. So I thought I should put it down and pick it up when I can actually get enjoyment from this, because at the moment all it's doing is matching my cardigan. It's not really doing much else for me. So I thought I'll try it again later. So unfortunately I did DNF this one. I do also apologize if I sound a little bit congested in this video. At the moment it's spring, which means all of the pollen and hay fever allergies for me, and so not only did I lose all of my footage for this wrap up, I also got hit like a truck by hay fever. So this is a very small window of time where I'm not actually sniffling 24/7. So I thought maybe I should film this. Anyway, we are carrying on into my other DNF, which is Iron Gold by Pierce Brown, another beloved book by a very popular author. And I was reading the audiobook for this, and the audiobook narrator has additions. So it's not just the same narrator that you heard from in book 1, it is additional narrators as well. And I think that took away from my experience, although if I read this physically, I probably wouldn't have cared for it either. And this is also another multiple perspective story. So clearly my brain was like, I don't want to think in September because I also obviously DNF'd this at about a third of the way through, mostly just because it was tedious to listen to, because unlike the first trilogy, Darrow is the main character, and the first book is kind of in that Hunger Games style. It's very brutal, and that brutality continues all through the trilogy. And yes, there is brutality in Iron Gold, but also it's driven by politics. And so because it has that sense of being removed from you, because it has other factors just being influenced by the characters, it didn't feel as immediate, it didn't feel as gripping, and I didn't care for the politics. I honestly didn't really care for the characters. So I thought, why am I making myself read this when I'm not actually liking it? And this book I tried on and off to read all through September, and I thought maybe if I DNF this, I might actually find some books that I vibe with and that suit my mood. And as soon as I DNF'd Iron Gold, I had a great time reading. So now onto a book that I actually really thoroughly enjoyed and finished during September, but I also think this tanked my reading a little bit too, just because of its length, not because of its content, and that is The Name of All Things by Jen Lyons. This is the sequel to Ruin of Kings. It is the second book in the Chaos of Dragons series. I think there's 5 books in that series and it's a completed series now. However, I'm putting a pause on it after reading this just because it slows down all of my other reading while I'm focused on it, just because of the length. And now that I've started them physically, I'm not going to do the audiobook. So these are a commitment, a worthwhile commitment, but they're a commitment. So I will likely be continuing either in December or maybe early next year. But this book I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. It didn't quite get to that 5, but it's about Kieran again. He was the protagonist in book 1. Obviously, he's continuing to be the protagonist in book 2, but he kind of shares that protagonist lens with another character. And this character is mentioned in book 1, but not really focused on. And now they are sitting in a tavern together having a discussion. And that discussion is kind of like that main character's catch up for Kieran. So they are revisiting their story and explaining everything to him and kind of catching him up over food and drink while they're waiting in this tavern for a key character to arrive. This key character is not a very likable one either. So it's an interesting dichotomy of likable, unlikable characters, different goals and different motivations of everybody, kind of at a meeting and boiling point. And it also discusses the magic and the law in this world so much more, and the demons in here so much more. So from that angle, I really liked it, but from the main character, I didn't really like them as much as Kieran. So when it came to different shifting perspectives, while I was interested, it just didn't have the same grip factor to the first book. And I'm hoping that with the third book, I am assuming some kind of queerness relationship, maybe polyamory is going to feature because it's really heavily foreshadowed. So I think from that book onwards, I'm probably going to really like it. Not that I read my fantasy to read romance, but when it's an awesome world with fantasy tropes in it, like that chosen one trope and the prophecies trope, but it's done well and convincingly, with faceted characters that have flaws but also goals and strive for different things, I think I'm really gonna like it. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this series. So something else really quick about this book that I really liked about the characters specifically is that there are villains in here, but like I suggested before with the tropes in here, while it plays with those quintessential fantasy tropes that we all know and love, it does it in a way that is quite unique and very admirable. And there's a villain in here that is perceived as the villain, but this character doesn't necessarily care that they're the villain or believe that they're doing the wrong thing. And they're not seeking destruction, they're seeking justice in a way. And so it's interesting to discuss that character's viewpoints with the others amongst themselves, and then realize that a bunch of the villains' driving forces make a lot of sense, and while they wouldn't go about them the same way that this villain is doing it, they still have a lot of understanding and kind of empathy for the end result, not the way morally that the villain got there. So it's interesting to see that they agree on certain points, but then disagree on the journey to get there, I suppose. It makes the characters feel more fleshed out and more full, and like they are actual potential people rather than just characters that are fictional. So it makes it very connective to me, and I think that's why I like this series so much, because obviously it's a queer positive story. It's got multifaceted characters. It's got great humor in the writing and the tone as well. I really like that. And even though it's long, I know I said it's long and it's taken me a while to get through, but when I sit down and read it, it actually reads quite quickly. So the way that it's written, it doesn't bog me down either. So I'm really liking this series. I think the first book so far is my favorite, and I will be continuing this. I didn't dislike the main character in this, I just prefer Kieran, so I really can't wait to continue and read more about Kieran. And then I finished that big chunky book, and I was like, you know what, I actually want to finish a book in one day and have it not feel like I'm trying to walk through porridge because it's so slow and taxing. So I was like, do I have any graphic novels on my TBR? And yes, I did. And I read Check Please, and this is a graphic novel comic series about Bittle, and Bittle is a guy who is going to college for the first time time. He loves baking, he's a vlogger, and he's also on his school hockey team. So he's wanting to join the college hockey team. And this really follows Biddle's relationship with the boys on the hockey team as they are progressing through years of college and how they're building their relationships with each other. There were moments of humor in here, and I just loved the beginning. It was so adorable. The art style is really wholesome as well. And I do want to continue this, and I was kind of on a high after reading it. So I gave it 4 stars initially, but I probably reflectively give it 3.5 because while I did enjoy it, I found the time skips in here a little bit jarring, and I would struggle to keep up with what was happening because I wanted more time spent with the characters, but really it was kind of just setting up this whole hockey thing. And I enjoy hockey, I guess, but it's not really what I'm super into. So I was like, I just want to know more about the characters and the baking. And there is a love interest for the main character Biddle, and so it's kind of like hinted at male romance as well. So again, another queer book, and I'm like, can you just focus on the romance and the baked goods, please? But I think it'll get to that point. So I'm looking forward to eventually continuing this one. Like I said, it's really enjoyable. So if you haven't started it, I would encourage you to. I think it started as a webtoon, the same as Heartstopper and Lore Olympus did, and I love those series as well. So this was enjoyable and worth reading. And then the next book that I finished is an audiobook because after I DNF'd Iron Gold, I felt free. And so I'm like, I'm going to actually do a reread that I know that I'll enjoy 100%. Whereas with Iron Gold, I was like, oh, I might try rereading this and see if I actually enjoy it, because initially I gave it 3 stars and then the second time I DNF'd it. So it just wasn't meant to be. But this next book I absolutely adored, and on my first read through I gave it about 4.5 stars, but on my reread now, which is 6 years after I initially read it, I gave The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet 5 stars because Becky Chambers is, as far as I'm concerned, one of my favorite authors. And I'm like, I need to reread all of their work again because it is so wholesome and it's just perfect. So that's why I picked up The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And so Angry Planet is really about Rosemary Harper, and Rosemary is trying to escape her past and kind of rewrite herself. And also, obviously, she's human. There are aliens in this series. So she's trying to recreate herself, I guess, not rewrite herself. That seems very robotic. And so she goes off planet to a ship, and that is Ashby's ship because he needs a new clerk. And so she joins his crew, but his crew is already established and they all get along because as far as he's concerned, he organizes big jobs for his crew that involve punching wormholes through space, and they are specialized to do that. So at the beginning of the book, Rosemary is introduced with her whole backstory that's a secret. Ashby is trying to find work for his crew to go on a long haul through space, and he comes across this job of a lifetime that is going to pay them heaps of money. So in the background, there is natural politics happening, but unlike a massive large-scale sci-fi book, this is more of a cozy sci-fi because while it does focus on those things, they are not the main focus, but I would argue that the relationships of the characters are the A and B plot, and the introduction of culture in this series is absolutely stunning. I love the way that the humans interact with the aliens because years and decades ago, the humans left Earth on what was called the Exodus fleet, and now they have naturally mingled with all of the different alien planets. So you've got human integration with alien culture and life, and so naturally you get mixing of languages. There's like a common tongue in a way, and there's a lot of different dialogues and cultural understandings that often get missed because people aren't familiar with each other's upbringings or backgrounds. And so it's really intriguing to read about these characters that are incredibly fictional because they have like 6 arms, but at the same time, they feel so human to me because all of their interactions are from a place of such deep relatability and vulnerability and curiosity. And I think that's wholeheartedly what I love about Becky Chambers is that they managed to reach into your heart and soul and just kind of place something warm in there and relatable. And that's what this series is to me. Well, I'm assuming the rest of the series will be the same way because I remember loving all of them. So I'm really eager to continue my reread of these all on audiobook, and I do plan on having a separate review up for Angry Planet because it is just worth it. Because before I would be like, hey, this is a great book, here's some vibes. And now I can actually kind of tell you that it's about Rosemary and Ashby and his crew. And so I feel like I've got more of an understanding of it now to actually discuss it. So I am excited to read more of Becky Chambers. So that is it really for the books that I have read and or DNF'd this month, but I also am currently reading 2 things, and I thought I'd finish them before October, but I was being a little bit ambitious given how labor intensive it is to wash, paint, and redo the walls in our house. It's taking a lot of time, and I've posted some reading vlogs and moving vlogs if you're interested. But the 2 books that I'm currently reading, one of them is physical, and yet I don't have it here because I'm just that organized, is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. And this is a fantasy book that also has multiple POVs, and the characters that I have been introduced to when I'm about 300 pages in are Okra, Elva, and Agnar. Okra is a mother who used to be a warrior, and you kind of get the sense that she has some form of PTSD because she went to war and waged battle, and now she's raising her son, who's about 10 or 11 years old, with her husband Thorkel, and they live on the edge of a steading, which is like a village. There's a lot of language in this that I struggled with, but I just went, you know what, I'm not even going to look up definitions or anything. I'm just going to read, and then probably it will make sense. And it has, for the most part, it has so far. So if you're worried about the way it's inspired by Norse mythology, you're not sure about all the terminology, or like with any fantasy, you're worried you're going to not be able to wrap your head around it, it's pretty doable. Just stick with it and you'll be fine. I was fine. So if I can do it, I'm sure you can. So when Okra discovers a body with her husband and her son while they are out hunting one day, they take it to their local steading. And the steading is kind of like their village, I suppose, ruled by a Jarl, which is like the chief, I guess, of the village, and has proved themselves worthy of being chief from their battle fame. So they take this body to the Jarl. The Jarl basically shuts them down, and then they realize that there have been raids on nearby homes and people have been murdered and the kids have been stolen. And so Okra is really worried about her son being kidnapped from her. And that's where we leave off Okra's story, and we go to Varg. And Varg is a thrall. I think it's a thrall, and he's got a collar around his neck. It's this book's version of slavery, essentially. And Varg is just escaping his captor. His sister has been murdered and he's trying to avenge her. And to do that, he needs to track down a she-witch, a Seared witch. I don't know how to pronounce it. It kind of just does the white noise thing in my head whenever I read the word in the book. So he's trying to track down a witch to invoke some spell so that he can track down his sister's murderer and get his revenge. But to prove himself worthy of the witch's abilities, he has to go up against one of these characters in a band called the Bloodsworn, and they're specialized warriors. And then we've also got Elva, and she is also a warrior because this book is very Norse inspired. It's not directly a Norse mythology retelling, but there is a lot of similarities to Vikings and battles and monsters and demons. So we've got Elva, who is also a warrior, and she's about 21, and her father has just given her an ultimatum, and she's also trying to track down this guy with her crew. And this guy is a form of shifter. He's called a tainted, and the tainted are descendants from the gods. So the gods used to be prevalent, they used to be alive and well. Now they have relics of their bodies and everything, just pieces and bits torn from them that have different kind of power depending on who wields them or who possesses them. And so you've got either the blood of the gods or an item of the gods, and these items are imbued with magic. And so naturally the people who are tainted have some form of magic. And it's been such a long time now that the tainted aren't just one thing. The bloodlines have mixed together. So the tainted that Elva is hunting is part of a bear, potentially. The bear god, I can't remember his name. And he can effectively shift to become more beast-like, so his teeth get sharp, his eyes go yellow, he gets the claws and stuff. So it's kind of like werewolves, but for different creatures that are predators, which I find pretty cool. And so I love that there is this interesting world building and lore being set up with these like werebeasts descended from the gods and with mixed bloodlines. There's different characters from different walks of life that I feel like are going to connect at some point. And I feel like Varg has a very interesting point that he might end up deviating from later, but I'm not sure how or why, because the series is called the Bloodsworn Saga, I think. And so the fact that he's encountered the Bloodsworn is intriguing to me. And on the front cover of Shadow of the Gods, there's a dragon. And one of the characters in the book at the very beginning says there are no such thing as dragonborn. But obviously, if there's a giant dragon on the front, something has got to happen, right? So I'm really excited to continue this, and I thought that I wouldn't love it based on my past experience with John Gwynne because I didn't love Malice very much, but I'm really enjoying this. So I'm hoping to give it 4 stars, but I'm doing a vlog about it, so I will talk about it naturally later on. But I'm also listening to an audiobook because after I finished Becky Chambers, I was like, I really want to continue, but I haven't written my review yet, and I don't want books 1 and 2 to mingle in my head. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to start a new release that I said I'd start ages ago and I just haven't. And that is the Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas. This is the same author who wrote Cemetery Boys, which is a Latinx trans love story about a boy who's a ghost and another boy who accidentally kind of resurrects him. And so they have to solve a problem together. I really liked it. And Sunbearer Trials is a fantasy book, obviously about a set of trials. And the characters in it are split in hierarchy. So the golds are the ones who are renowned and they are like the demigods. The jades are also demigods, but not as strongly as the golds. And then there are also the humans. So humans and jade live together, but the golds are very much segregated from everybody. And so every decade they have to do a sacrifice to Sol, the sun god. I think to renew power of some kind or renew blessing. It seems kind of cult-like to me, and I feel like something about it is going to be identified or undone because that just seems very dark. So we're following these characters who go on the Sunbearer Trials and they have to basically compete to survive, and the loser gets sacrificed, and so they're all trying to be as high up in the charts as possible. So it's kind of like if you mixed Percy Jackson vibes with the Hunger Games, and yet it wasn't quite as brutal and it was very Latinx oriented, then you would get the Sunbearer Trials. I'm really liking it so far, and I like the protagonist and how they are mischievous and almost irritable, but they've got close friends and they're starting to pick apart different things about what's going on around them. I'm enjoying it and I like the audiobook. It's very well narrated and told, and I guess I like the tone of the story and the writing style as well, because every time I have a spare moment, I'm like, I should listen to my audiobook. And I only do that if I'm obviously enjoying it, which I am. So those are my 2 current reads. That is all that I've read in DNF for the entire month of September. I was hoping to read a lot more, but obviously with the house, we've just been busy. So let me know how many books you read in September. Thank you for watching this late September wrap up. I'll talk to you down in the comments and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.